Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ted Shaughnessy. Ted Shaughnessy, born on February 7, 1963, is the youngest of three children. His family lived near Phoenix, Arizona. From a young age, all the siblings in the family developed a love for fast cars. Ted dreamed of owning sports cars and was passionate about everything related to them. Relatives and friends described Ted as a kind and fun-loving person. In the early 1980s, he met a woman named Corey at a hair salon in Phoenix. They began dating, and in the late 1980s they got married. The couple later moved to Austin, Texas, where they started a jewelry business together. Corey had a deep passion for gems and fine arts, and worked as an appraiser in their family business. In contrast, Ted was friendly and approachable, easily building relationships with customers and partners, which helped secure profitable deals while keeping everyone happy. Their family business continued to grow, and they bought a new house near their store. By 2000, the couple still had no children. In the spring of 2000, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted a 1.5-year-old boy, whom they named Nick. This moment marked the long-awaited beginning of parenthood for the family. Over the years, Nick grew up and developed a love for fast cars, just like his father. To share these experiences, Nick and Ted often went go-karting together, and Ted also took his son for rides in a sports car. Over time, Nick began to show an aptitude for business. He started selling chocolate bars from his school locker and always had pocket money. While in high school, he developed a hobby of disassembling cars. In 2015, he met a girl named Jackie Edison, who had recently moved to Texas from New York. The two were immediately attracted to each other, but Nick's parents, Ted and Corey, disapproved of Jackie, feeling that she was not the right person for him. However, they chose not to interfere in the relationship in order to maintain a good relationship with Nick. After high school, the couple moved into a house near a university. Jackie planned to study engineering, while Nick pursued a business degree. During this time, Nick also became interested in trading. Despite living far from home, he still made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit his parents. Life seemed to be on track, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. Early in the morning of March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey were awakened by the sound of their dog barking. This was not unusual, as dogs often react to possums or other small animals that sometimes wander onto the family property. Corey believed there was no reason to worry. Ted decided to go check out the disturbance. Since the couple lived in Texas, he brought his .45 caliber pistol for protection. According to Corey, she quickly fell asleep after Ted left to investigate. However, just a few minutes later, she was awakened by a loud bang coming from the kitchen, followed by several more. Panicking, Corey grabbed the gun she had left by the bed and ran to help her husband. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she noticed their dog. Suddenly, she was shot while standing in the doorway, and a dark figure appeared, looking menacing. In a panic, Corey fired all 6 bullets from her pistol toward the door, unsure of who or what was there. After firing, she ran into the closet to hide, fearing for her life and expecting the intruder to find her and shoot her. While in the closet, she grabbed her phone and called 911. She reported that someone had broken into the house and that she had shot one of the attackers. During the call, Corey heard faint moaning coming from somewhere in the house. She couldn't identify who was making the sound. Worried that her husband might have been injured in the gunfight, she felt an overwhelming urge to go help him. However, the police insisted that she stay in the closet, warning her that it might be too dangerous to leave. 15 minutes later, Corey was notified that the police had arrived at her house. By then, the moaning had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the house. Cautiously, Corey walked out of the closet and toward the front door. As she passed through the kitchen, she saw her husband, Ted, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings. Overwhelmed with shock, Corey tried to open the front door, but found no one there. It turned out that the police had gone to the wrong house. At the time, they were at a neighbor's house, trying to determine where the gunshots had come from. They eventually realized their mistake and rushed to Corey's house, where they found her trembling on the doorstep. The officers quickly got back into their car and drove to Corey's home, arriving around 8 a.m. There, they met Corey, who was deeply distressed and struggling to process the events that had unfolded. Although still in shock and uncertain about the details, she knew her husband had died. Over the next 3 months, Corey's son Nick and his girlfriend Jackie moved in with her to provide support. Friends and acquaintances of the family were horrified by the tragedy. Ted was described as a kind and hard-working man who had built his life with integrity and deserved to spend his later years in peace. No one believed he had any enemies capable of such a violent act. Speculation soon arose that the motive for the attack might have been linked to the family's wealth, as their home contained many valuable items. Police examined the crime scene and found 2 different types of ammunition, suggesting there were 2 attackers, each using a different handgun. There were no signs of forced entry, but police discovered an open window in a distant bedroom, where a surveillance camera had been removed. It appeared the attackers had entered the house through this window. A forensic scientist discovered fingerprints at the scene, which were immediately sent to a lab for analysis. In the room where Nick had been staying, police found a chest of drawers that had previously held a .40 caliber handgun. However, the gun was missing and turned out to be the only item stolen from the house. Since the caliber matched one of the guns used in the shooting, police suspected it was the murder weapon. After interviewing the Corey family and their neighbors, police learned that the family owned a high-value jewelry store, which was well known in the area. Corey, her son Nick, and Jackie surrendered their cell phones to assist in the investigation. Nick, who had an alibi because he was 2 hours away from his parents' home at the time of the attack, supported his story with phone records and the security system he had installed at his parents' house. However, the security system had been turned off on the night of the shooting, which immediately raised suspicions. Nick explained that this was not unusual, as his parents sometimes left the system off when they were both at home. Nevertheless, even when the system was in sleep mode, it still recorded some activity. Police discovered that the criminals likely broke into the house at 4:27 a.m., which was the exact time the system was disabled. The next signal from the system was recorded at 4:44 a.m., giving the criminals only about 17 minutes to search the house. Rumor had it that the house contained millions of dollars worth of jewelry, gold, safes, and other valuables. However, nothing appeared to have been stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Adding to the mystery was the strange behavior of the family dogs. How could they neither hear nor smell the intruders and fail to alert the family for 17 minutes? Dogs would normally bark even if an unfamiliar car stopped in the driveway. Clearly, something was wrong. The first person the police suspected was Corey. Suspicion fell on her because she was the sole beneficiary of Ted's life insurance policy, which was set to pay her $1 million. Shortly after her husband's death, she contacted the insurance company to file a claim. She argued that, after her husband's death, the company he managed began to face serious challenges. Sales dropped significantly, customers left, and delivery problems arose, creating an urgent need for money. However, the insurance company denied her claim because she was already a suspect in her husband's murder. This was how Corey found out she was under investigation, much to her outrage. Nick and his girlfriend Jackie were also considered suspects. When the police searched Nick and Jackie's home, they discovered a marriage certificate. It turned out that the young couple had secretly married 8 months earlier, without informing their parents. Nick's mother only learned about the marriage through the police, which shocked her. Corey gave Jackie a piece of gold jewelry adorned with diamonds as a wedding gift. Shortly after, Nick and his wife took over the family jewelry store. These changes seemed to help Corey cope with the pain of his loss. Meanwhile, the police received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the window of the Corey family home. The fingerprints were found to belong to the installer who had installed the window years ago and had not returned since. This man lived in Minnesota, not Texas, and had a solid alibi. However, the police could not disregard the window, as it appeared to be the most logical point of entry for the perpetrator. During an interrogation, one of the officers noticed that Nick repeatedly mentioned using the window to enter his house when he came home drunk from a party, or when he did not want to wake his sleeping parents. Interestingly, the police had not told him that this could have been how the intruder entered the house. In another interview, Nick mentioned his best friend, Spencer Patterson. The two had been close for years, and Spencer frequently visited Nick's family home. Spencer, who came from a poor background and disliked his job, may have secretly envied Nick, who was wealthier and more fortunate. Nick had told Spencer that a particular window in the house was often left unlocked, which the police believed could have been the intruder's entry point. Spencer was also familiar with the layout of the house, including the location of the family safe and gun boxes. During one of the interviews, Nick revealed that he had previously given Spencer a .380 caliber pistol. This detail raised suspicion because cartridges of the same caliber were found at the scene of the massacre, linking it to one of the murder weapons. The police decided to question Spencer, who admitted that he was familiar with the window in question and had visited Nick's house several times. Spencer also handed over the .380 caliber pistol that Nick had given him. However, after conducting a ballistics test, it was confirmed that the gun was not used in the murder, proving that Spencer was not involved in the case. Spencer, however, pointed the police toward another, more likely suspect, Nick. The police could not ignore the fact that Nick was eager to propose numerous theories about the case, none of which proved useful. This raised suspicions about whether he was involved in Ted's death. Throughout the investigation, Nick's behavior drew attention. The day after the murder, he independently questioned the neighbors as if he were taking over the investigation. When the police conducted fingerprint and DNA tests on everyone present in the house, Nick's behavior was notably strange. It was discovered that Nick was experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business ventures were unprofitable, and he had spent all the money his parents had given him. Nick's independent projects had stalled, and he showed no intention of finding a job. For a long time, his parents had supported him, covering all his expenses, but they had hoped he would eventually become self-sufficient. Just before the tragedy, Nick's parents had loaned him $30,000 with the intention of funding his future college education. However, instead of pursuing his studies, he spent the money on trading, as he had always done. Disappointed, his parents decided to stop supporting him financially, hoping this would motivate him to take responsibility and start building his own career and life. To reinforce this, they asked Nick and Jackie to live separately. His parents believed that living apart from his girlfriend might encourage him to consider college, much like Jackie. Instead, Nick borrowed another $5,000 from a family friend and continued gambling it all on trading. He ultimately failed and never repaid the loan. Police suspect that these financial troubles may have been the motive for the attack. However, Nick had an alibi. It seemed likely that he did not personally shoot his father, so the police needed to determine who had committed the crime. The police returned to Nick and Jackie's home. This time, they found several bullet boxes, with the brand and caliber of the bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The investigation also uncovered another lie. Nick had previously claimed that he had not visited his parents' home for a long time, but the police discovered that he had been there just a few days before the tragedy. Although Nick denied this, the police obtained irrefutable evidence proving he had lied. Another suspicious detail emerged. 2 days before the attack on Ted, there was an unusual gap in the communication records between Nick and Jackie. The two had been in regular contact via phone and text, but during this particular period, they had stopped communicating entirely. When their cell phones were examined, it became clear that the devices had been deliberately wiped clean shortly before the investigation began. Many messages had been edited or deleted, and the phones had been factory reset. However, they had overlooked the fact that all the data had been backed up on a computer. The reason behind their hasty attempt to clean the phones soon became clear. Turns out the couple was facing much more serious financial troubles than Nick had disclosed to his parents. The police decided to question Spencer again, suspecting that he was withholding information. Spencer eventually confessed that, shortly before Ted was murdered, Nick had approached him with an offer to pay him to carry out a murder. The plan was to kill both of Nick's parents. If the plan succeeded, Nick would inherit about $8 million, including business assets. Spencer revealed that he had been promised a share of the money. However, Spencer refused to commit the crime, prompting Nick to threaten to kill him if he revealed anything about the plan. Corey, shocked and refusing to believe the accusations, hired Austin's best lawyer to defend Nick. She believed that Nick had been victimized by the same arbitrary police actions she had experienced during the initial investigation. On May 29, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder, a crime punishable by death under state law. 2 months later, Jackie was released on bail. Corey had hoped that Nick would soon be cleared and released, but the situation took a drastic turn when the investigation exposed the real culprits. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the house, dated February 28, which showed 2 unidentified men. One of them was later identified as Cameron Vosmek, an employee of a window company whose fingerprints had been found early in the investigation. Upon contacting the window company, authorities confirmed Cameron's identity. When police visited his home again, Cameron was absent. Instead, they spoke to his wife, who immediately admitted she knew the reason for their visit. She revealed that her husband had denied any involvement in the crime, but implicated his co-worker, 25-year-old Johnny Leon. When police located Johnny, he initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually confessed. Johnny revealed that Nick had offered him $100,000 to kill someone close to him. Johnny admitted to being an accomplice, overwhelmed with guilt to the point of requesting the death penalty for himself. He confessed to using a .40 caliber gun provided by Nick, a weapon that had previously been reported missing from Ted's home. Police further discovered that Nick had disabled the security system on the property. This revelation horrified Corey, who now faced the devastating reality of her son's true nature. She realized that for 3 months after Ted's death, she had unknowingly lived under the same roof as the person who had plotted to kill her. Nick attempted to justify his actions, claiming that his father had been suffering from chronic depression and that he was merely aiding his father by ending his life. Corey staunchly refuted Nick's claim, asserting that Ted had no history of mental health issues. Meanwhile, Nick's wife, Jackie, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming ignorance of her husband's plans. Jackie initially refused to cooperate with the police and sought to avoid responsibility. However, it later emerged that she had been aware of Nick's intentions. Jackie claimed she had tried to dissuade Nick from proceeding with the crime, but her statement was met with skepticism. Although she could have warned the police, Jackie chose not to. Jackie eventually agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which earned her release on bail. She testified against Nick, resumed her college education, and returned to her daily life. Meanwhile, authorities identified the second accomplice in Ted's murder as Ariane Smith. Despite the severity of their crimes, Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Ariane Smith avoided the death penalty by striking plea deals with the prosecution. In April 2021, they each pleaded guilty to lesser charges and were sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. As of June 2023, all 3 remain incarcerated. Jackie received a much lighter sentence for her cooperation. She served 4 months in prison and was placed on 10 years of probation. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Ronald Jansen. In 2007, a terrible tragedy occurred that still haunts the local community. Fortunately, the perpetrator was caught and is now serving time for his crime. However, the length of the sentence has sparked much debate and raised several questions. Annick van Uytzel, a kind and humble girl, enjoyed spending time with her friends. She excelled in school and had big dreams for her future. On the evening of Friday, April 27, 2007, Annick chose to celebrate the end of the school week with her friends. She attended a Catholic gathering held at a small house in the countryside. Unlike the usual parties that can involve alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy activities, this event focused on providing safe and spiritual education for young people. The attendees ranged in age from 6 years old to teenagers and even adults up to 35 years old, all gathered to sing, play games, chat, and share their thoughts. That night, the atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and friendly conversations. Annick, who had been dancing with her friends, forgot about everything else. The party continued until 4 a.m. Afterward, Annick chose to cycle home with her friends. At a crossroads in the woods, they parted ways. In the morning, Annick's parents grew worried when she did not return home or even call. They began searching for their daughter, who was not answering their phone calls. Annick's parents learned that she had left the party at 4 a.m. and had not been seen since. She had not contacted anyone, which was unusual for her. Her family and friends joined in the search for Annick. Desperate to find their daughter, her parents contacted the police. They quickly took over the case and began searching for her. An official investigation was launched to understand the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The idea that Annick had run away was quickly dismissed. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had not mentioned any plans to leave her parents. Annick had no boyfriend or savings to go out with. She was not depressed, had no conflicts, and had no enemies, so there was no reason for her to end her life. The police questioned her parents, friends, and everyone who attended the Catholic gathering. But no one seemed suspicious, and no one witnessed anything unusual. The police mapped out the route Annick took home that night. They meticulously checked the road, the corners, and all the surveillance camera footage from cameras along her usual route. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the woods where she disappeared, leaving the investigation without any significant evidence. The police even explored other possible paths in the woods. There was speculation that Annick may have changed her route due to a fallen tree, or that she may have had an accident while cycling and was waiting for help. However, neither she nor her bike was found, as if they had disappeared completely. The police concluded that Annick was likely the victim of a crime, possibly a kidnapping, but no ransom demand was made, which was concerning. Despite this, people still hoped to find her alive, and the investigation remained active. The search was one of the largest in the country's history. In addition to the police, hundreds of volunteers were involved, including mounted officers, dogs, and helicopters. Police interviewed all local residents near the club and the area where Annick went missing, but no one had seen her. All efforts seemed to be in vain. Her parents distributed flyers with their daughter's photo and put up posters of Annick everywhere. They spoke to the media, begging for their daughter to come home and for any witnesses to come forward. The lack of leads made Annick's disappearance even more puzzling. Police found no signs of a struggle, no belongings belonging to Annick, and no other clues. They tried to track her missing cell phone, discovering that it had been turned on and off several times that night and the next morning, connecting to cell towers. Police and search teams scoured the areas where Annick's phone signal was detected but found nothing. On the evening of May 3, 2007, a passerby walking along the canal saw a large package floating in the water. Concerned, he called the police. At the time, the whole country was on high alert for Annick's disappearance, and the man feared that the package might contain her body. When divers arrived, they struggled to retrieve the package because it was unusually heavy. Upon examination, they discovered human remains inside, carefully packed with 2 bricks to weigh it down and prevent it from floating. The killer may have underestimated the strong currents of the canal and the effects of decomposition. Identifying the victim proved difficult due to the state of decomposition and water damage. A forensic expert was only able to confirm that the remains belonged to a girl. Police suspected that it could be Anik, who had recently gone missing, and her dental records eventually confirmed this. An autopsy revealed that Anik had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with a fractured skull and signs of assault. The news devastated Anik's family, who had hoped for her safe return. The brutal nature of the murder raised concerns in the community, highlighting that the perpetrator was dangerous and posed a threat to society. The investigation faced significant challenges. Although the area where the body was discovered was thoroughly searched, no evidence was found that could help solve the case. The only potential clue was Anik's missing bicycle, which may have had the attacker's fingerprints on it. More than a year later, on August 26, 2008, Anik's bicycle was found 50 kilometers away in Leuven. It was discovered in a suspicious location, suggesting that the perpetrator had deliberately hidden it. Additionally, the bicycle had been repainted. Unfortunately, the perpetrator had been very careful to remove any traces, and no fingerprints or other evidence were recovered from the bicycle. On January 3, 2010, almost 3 years after Anik's disappearance, emergency services responded to a report of a fire. Firefighters discovered an Opel Corsa burning on the road. When they arrived, they found 2 bodies inside the car. The car belonged to Kevin Paulus. Dental records identified the deceased as Shauna Appletans, 18, and Kevin Paulus, 22, the car's owners. However, autopsy results showed that their deaths were not caused by fire. Both had been shot before the car caught fire. Authorities believe the couple was murdered, and that the car was deliberately set on fire to destroy vital evidence. The shocking murder in this quiet community has had a profound effect on both locals and the police. Fear has spread throughout the area, with many people reluctant to leave their homes and their teenage children being prevented from going out. The public is calling on the police to quickly identify the perpetrator and restore safety to the community. When the police investigated Kevin's background, they discovered that he had a history of violence. Kevin was Shauna's boyfriend, and it is believed that he even knew Anik. The police found Anik's bicycle in Leuven, where Shauna lived. This suggested a potential connection between the 2 murders. As the investigation progressed, Kevin was named as a possible suspect. Police believe he may have killed Anik first, then his girlfriend Shauna, before setting fire to her bike to destroy the evidence and taking his own life. However, this theory requires further investigation to be proven. The police are focused on gathering evidence of his guilt, but their efforts are hampered by a lack of witnesses and direct evidence linking Kevin to the crimes. Soon after, a new suspect emerged: Ronald Jansen, Shauna and Kevin's strange neighbor, identified by other residents. People around said that Ronald often argued with Shauna and even fought with her. Kevin stood up for her. It seems that there was considerable tension between the neighbors, raising the question of whether this conflict could escalate into murder. Ronald is a teacher known to be responsible and serious, a model teacher respected by both his colleagues and students. At first glance, he seems unlikely to be involved in any criminal activity. However, he has been summoned for questioning in connection with the cases of Anik, Shauna, and Kevin. Ronald maintained his innocence, claiming that he had spent the day at home watching TV and had not gone out. Since he lived alone, no one could verify his alibi. Ronald stated that the conflicts between him and the young couple, Kevin and Shauna, were due to their constant insults and rude behavior, which led to arguments. He denied ever fighting with them, describing himself as a polite person. However, The police found his statements concerning because they were not convincing. They obtained a search warrant for his home, and during the search, they discovered a gun hidden in a bag of cat food. Ronald could not explain why he had the gun and quickly became agitated. Eventually, Ronald admitted to killing Shauna and Kevin. He explained that on the evening of January 2, he could not sleep and went outside. While he was out, his noisy neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, arrived and immediately began taunting and insulting him, as they often did. In a fit of rage, he lost control and ran home to get a gun and 3 gas cans. Upon returning outside, he found that Shauna and Kevin had already left. He knocked on their door, and when Shauna answered, he threatened her with the weapon. He forced them both into his car and drove away from the city. Kevin was driving. Ronald was in the front passenger seat, holding a weapon and pointing it at Kevin, while Shauna was in the back seat, unable to escape. She cried and begged Ronald to let them go. They drove for about 30 minutes until Ronald found a suitable deserted area. He ordered them to stop and shot Kevin twice in the temple, killing him instantly. Frightened, Shauna began to cry even louder and begged for her life. Ronald demanded that she be intimate with him, promising to release her afterward. Reluctantly, she agreed. However, after they were intimate, he realized that he could not spare her life because she might call the police. Coldly, he killed her as well. Ronald then moved Kevin's body into the trunk of his car, drove to a location closer to his home, and burned the car to destroy all evidence. He walked home through the fields and arrived at 4 a.m. Once home, he showered, burned his clothes, and threw the murder weapon into a ditch. Despite a thorough search, the weapon was never found. Ronald knew how to evade justice, so he carefully washed the blood and gunpowder residue off his hands. Eventually, Ronald Jansen was arrested, and the police began collecting evidence to prosecute him. Ronald was born on February 6, 1971, in Boorsum, Limburg Province, Belgium. He was the third of 4 children in his family. His father worked as a miner, and his mother was a cleaner. Despite being a diligent student, Ronald faced bullying from his classmates due to his speech difficulties. Frustrated, he attacked his bullies with a baseball bat, which resulted in his suspension. After this incident, his mother enrolled him in another school, but the challenges continued. At home, Ronald suffered physical and mental abuse from his father. The fear of returning home and the constant violence caused him to have trouble sleeping. At one point, Ronald considered taking his own life or harming his father. Ultimately, he chose the latter. Ronald's father was diabetic and required insulin injections. Ronald switched the insulin with a dangerous substance, which his father accidentally injected. Although his father survived, he realized what Ronald had done. Instead of reporting Ronald to the police, he chose to abuse him even more. As a result, Ronald ran away from home and moved to a distant place. Using his skills, he enrolled in a university and eventually moved to Leuven. To support himself during his studies, Ronald worked part-time. Although he earned little money, he managed to save. In 1993, he graduated and began his career as a teacher. During his final year of study, Ronald met a girl named Natalie. She was from the Netherlands, 3 years older than him, and both attractive and kind. The young couple developed a strong relationship and began dating. After 2 years, they got married. For a while, they moved frequently because of Natalie's job. However, Ronald easily found teaching positions and quickly became a respected educator at every institution he joined. Eventually, they settled in Loxbergen, where Ronald began teaching not only computer science, but also mathematics and economics at the university. Intelligent, well-educated, and approachable, Ronald became popular among his colleagues and students. He enjoyed hiking outdoors, which helped him manage his insomnia. Ronald and Natalie dreamed of having a large family. Their first daughter was born in 1998, followed by their second daughter 3 years later. Unfortunately, Having children began to put a strain on their marriage. Misunderstandings and conflicts arose between them. Ronald, who had long struggled with sleep problems, found it even harder to rest due to the constant crying of his newborn. His persistent insomnia made him irritable and aggressive, which frightened Natalie. Natalie went to the police and accused Ronald of abuse. She claimed that Ronald had given her sleeping pills and abused her while she was unconscious. Ronald denied the accusations, stating that he had given her the pills to calm her down and that everything between them had been consensual. The police doubted Natalie's testimony, and the case was eventually closed. Following this, Natalie filed for divorce, took the children, and left Ronald, who stayed behind and lived alone. He did not make an effort to maintain contact with his children. Neighbors often saw him wandering around at night, seemingly due to insomnia. Although they found his behavior strange, they were not particularly concerned. Had the police taken Natalie's accusations seriously, some of the subsequent tragedies might have been prevented. From the information available to them, it was evident that Ronald was a cunning man. His intelligence allowed him to destroy evidence and evade responsibility. Criminals like Ronald are among the most difficult to catch, and holding them accountable for their actions is an extremely challenging task. Surprisingly, Ronald admitted to killing Anik in 2007 and confessed to 3 other instances of abuse committed in a dormitory in Leuven during his university years. He claimed that he did not know the victims' names, could not remember the dates of the attacks, and could not describe the victims because it was too dark to see their faces. Ronald insisted that Anik's murder was accidental. According to Ronald, he could not sleep, so he drove to another city, where he encountered Anik cycling through the neighborhood. He blocked her path with his car, frightening her. Anik abandoned her bike and tried to run away, but Ronald caught her, tied her hands, and forced her into his car. He brought her to his home. Ronald claimed he had no intention of abusing or killing her, stating that he only wanted her to sleep in bed with him overnight and planned to release her the next morning. However, the next morning, Ronald got into an argument with his neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, who insulted him. Fearing that Anik might remember his identity and report him to the police, Ronald decided to kill her. At the same time, he also decided to abuse her. Ronald hit Anik in the head with a hammer in the bathroom and wiped the area with cleaning products to eliminate evidence. However, the police did not believe his explanation. They suspected the murder had a much deeper motive, and it appeared that Ronald had planned to kill her. The public was shocked when the truth was revealed. No one could believe that Ronald, a seemingly respectable man, could have committed such horrific crimes. Ronald's attorney sought to highlight his mental abnormalities and requested a psychiatric evaluation. Experts concluded that, although Ronald displayed certain psychological deviations, he was competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists described him as a latent psychopath and a serial killer who acted with intelligence and precision. His crimes followed a calculated pattern, beginning with abuse, breaking into dormitories to attack girls, and culminating in murder. Ronald has shown no remorse for his crimes. His humble and unassuming appearance helped him avoid suspicion. Ronald Jansen's trial began in late September 2011. The jury convicted Ronald Jansen of murder and abuse. Given his high risk of reoffending, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Belgium, a life sentence does not necessarily mean that the convicted individual will spend the remainder of their life in prison. Typically, those serving such sentences are imprisoned for between 15 and 23 years. After serving 15 years, Ronald will be eligible to apply for parole, which could potentially allow him to be released early. The families of the victims and others were outraged by the lenient sentence given to Ronald, who was responsible for taking at least 3 lives and abusing several young girls. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bianca Edmonds. Bianca Edmonds was the second of 4 children, with 2 brothers and 1 sister. When Bianca was young, her father took a job with a mining company, which kept him away from home for long periods. This created tension in the family, as her mother wanted him to spend more time with them, but he could not quit his job. This eventually led to their separation. Bianca's mother later remarried another man, who adopted Bianca and her siblings. As a result, Bianca was often referred to by her stepfather's surname, Edmonds. This did not bother the family or Edmonds much, as she had little contact with her biological father in her early years. However, as she grew older and finished school, she reconnected with her biological father, and they developed a close relationship. After completing her secondary education, Bianca joined the Australian Navy. Unfortunately, a year later, she injured her back during training, which led to her being discharged for health reasons. After recovering, she worked various jobs in the retail industry but found it difficult to hold down a permanent position. In 2007, she gave birth to her first son after starting a relationship with a man. However, the man was not interested in family life, and they eventually broke up. By this time, Bianca had matured and knew what she wanted in life. She longed for reliable support and a comfortable lifestyle. In early 2012, shortly after turning 26, she met Michael Capo Siena, who was 35. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and they got married that same year. At the end of 2012, Bianca became pregnant again, and on June 3, 2013, she gave birth to a son. Although their relationship progressed quickly, it was toxic from the start. Michael often complained that Bianca was too controlling. The couple argued frequently, and shortly after the birth of their son, they decided to divorce. In early 2015, Bianca met Glenn Cassidy, a 48-year-old man, through a dating app. As usual, Bianca acted quickly. She appreciated Glenn's gentle nature, which suited her desire to be proactive in the relationship. Their initial online flirtation quickly turned into a real-life meeting and intimacy. Although Glenn was 20 years older than Bianca and was married with 2 children from a previous marriage, their similar life experiences seemed to help them connect quickly. In February 2016, they got married. Meanwhile, Bianca faced a number of personal challenges, most notably a custody battle with her ex-husband, Michael. Bianca's second husband, Michael, was initially not very involved in their son's life and often refused to see him. However, things changed when Michael entered a new relationship, achieved financial stability, and decided to spend more time with his son, who was then 9 months old. In March 2014, Michael requested visitation rights for his son. This led to a number of disputes, with Bianca accusing her ex-husband of being toxic and unfit to be a father. Michael decided to file a lawsuit against Bianca. By August 2015, after several court hearings, he was granted visitation rights, but with strict restrictions. He could only see his son in a neutral location under supervision, with 2-hour visits in Melbourne, a 2-hour drive from where Michael lived. This arrangement caused significant inconvenience for Bianca. She was unhappy that Michael was still interfering in their son's life, and she wanted to sever the relationship but could not find a way to do so. Unfortunately, the situation did not improve. Michael decided to take legal action again, seeking to increase the time and frequency of his visitation with his son and to remove the supervision requirement. This frustrated Bianca even more, leading to numerous arguments that sometimes escalated into physical confrontations. Michael's girlfriend described Bianca as a toxic person who tried to limit Michael's communication with his son out of anger. She said that Michael had changed his mind and wanted to reconnect with the child, and that he was legally entitled to do so. Michael's girlfriend portrayed him as a devoted family man with a kind personality. On the other hand, Glenn, who was in a relationship with Bianca, viewed Michael as a toxic and cruel person who could pose a threat to his son. Bianca frequently expressed her concerns about Michael to Glenn, claiming that he had threatened to kidnap her son. Bianca also attempted to manipulate her son psychologically by telling him that Michael, his biological father, was a bad person, but this tactic did not have the desired effect. Instead, she began to manipulate Glenn, using him as her main tool. Tensions in the family escalated, largely due to Bianca's provocations. She refused to be intimate with her husband unless he agreed to the idea of her ex-husband Michael's death. Over time, their relationship deteriorated. Bianca began to pressure and belittle Glenn, calling him a coward for not dealing with Michael and for not helping her. Initially, Glenn took her words as a joke, but over time, he began to seriously consider killing Michael due to the constant pressure he faced when his wife suggested planning the action. Glenn had written a fairly basic list of important points by hand. He wanted to shoot his enemy and then find a way to dispose of the body. In addition, Glenn's notes were full of spelling errors, highlighting his difficulties with writing. Bianca had received support from her husband, and she prepared him to commit the crime. Glenn desperately wanted to have a child with her, and her manipulation regarding intimacy worked. The couple, who had difficulty conceiving, shared their struggles with their friends. Bianca cleverly convinced Glenn that after Michael died, he would definitely have an heir. After this plan was documented, they began to prepare and execute it step by step. They searched for the best location for an ambush and created a map of the area where Michael lived with his new girlfriend. Bianca's knowledge of the layout of Michael's house helped her create a detailed plan, including the locations of doors and windows. They were very thorough in their preparations. They even mapped out the locations of streetlights and nearby houses with barking dogs. Bianca was eager to proceed and urged that Michael be killed as soon as possible. However, each time they set a date, things went wrong, causing delays. Glenn visited Michael's house several times to assess the entrances and exits of various streets. During these visits, he would call Bianca to discuss any problems that were interfering with their plans. He often expressed frustration that Michael was not home at the scheduled time, as he seemed to be working late or socializing with friends. The attackers communicated in code and referred to the area around Michael's house as the workplace. Glenn often stayed late, waiting for the target of the attack. Despite Bianca's encouragement, Glenn remained anxious and uncertain. Bianca employed her main tactic, intimacy, assuring him that once Michael was dead, he would have everything he wanted. Later, for reasons unknown, the police obtained a recording of their conversation. In response, Glenn installed a call recording app on his cell phone, possibly suspecting that he was being manipulated and wanting to protect himself in case things went wrong. Regardless, this did not absolve him of guilt for the shooting that followed. While carrying out this heinous plan, Bianca was supposed to be on vacation with Glenn's mother. The destination was on the other side of Australia, likely chosen to provide Bianca with an alibi that would convince the police of her innocence. On March 11, 2016, she prepared for the trip and spoke to Glenn about their plans. The next day, March 12, Glenn drove 170 kilometers to Michael's house. At 12:23 p.m., he sent another text message, expressing his love for her and speaking angrily about Michael. Around 1 p.m. that same day, Glenn drove to the road leading to Michael's house. He reiterated his love for Bianca and his willingness to carry out his plan. During this time, Glenn set up an ambush, positioning himself to see the front door of the house. When Michael and Silvana Silva, his girlfriend, arrived home, they settled in to watch a movie. At 7:18 p.m., Silvana looked out the window and saw a man get out of his car and walk toward their house empty-handed. Recognizing him, she told Michael, feeling confused. This was odd since they lived far from Bianca and her new husband, leaving them puzzled as to how he had gotten there. Glenn noticed some people walking by, then returned to his car, presumably to assess the area and collect his thoughts. At 7:27 p.m., he got out of his car again, this time carrying a large white bag. After checking around and confirming that no one was nearby, he approached Michael's front door at 7:30 p.m. Glenn knocked on the door, and his sudden appearance at such a late hour made Michael nervous. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife for protection. Silvana opened the door slightly and kept it on the chain. A brief conversation ensued, in which Michael told Glenn that he could not help Glenn. Glenn then held out his hand as if to say goodbye, and Michael, thinking it was safe, shook his hand. This turned out to be a grave mistake. Glenn grabbed Michael's hand, forcing him into the house. A struggle broke out as Glenn attempted to pull out a handgun and aim it at Michael's head. Michael fought back violently with the knife, striking Glenn several times. Tragically, a shot rang out, killing Michael instantly. Glenn then pointed the gun at Silvana, apparently intending to eliminate her as a witness. However, he had only loaded one bullet into the gun, and when he pulled the trigger, the handgun clicked but did not fire. In a fit of rage, he struck Silvana with his gun, knocking her unconscious. Glenn may have intended to kill her, but after the first blow, he collapsed to the floor, bleeding heavily from a stab wound. By 9:32 p.m., the situation was over. Silvana regained consciousness and found both men dead. She called emergency services, reporting that she had been attacked and that her fiancé had died. She had only suffered a minor concussion from the blow to her head and was weakened by blood loss. When the police arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Silvana gave a detailed account of the events, but as the sole survivor, she became the prime suspect. The police quickly determined that Silvana had nothing to do with the murder. They located Glenn's car parked on the street across from the house. Inside, they found his untouched lunch of fried chicken and green beans. A database check confirmed that the car belonged to Glenn. Police reviewed surveillance camera footage and accessed Glenn's mobile phone. The case was complicated from the start, taking 3 months for police to identify Bianca as the mastermind behind the attack. She apparently believed she would escape, so she was shocked when the police arrived at her home. Bianca Edmonds was arrested in December 2016 and taken to the police station for questioning, where she became hysterical. She acted as if Glenn was making things up and tried to convince him that he had not made a terrible mistake. However, he ignored her warnings and went ahead with his plan while she was away. Bianca claimed that her boyfriend was furious with Michael's behavior and that he was going to take their son away. According to Bianca, Glenn wanted to spend more time with the child. Although Glenn was not the boy's biological father, he had long wanted a child. The police knew this was a lie. Evidence from Glenn's phone confirmed their suspicions. The phone contained saved text messages and recorded calls detailing the planned crime. The police uncovered a wealth of information about the murder plot that had been in the works for months. In her defense, Bianca presented the last text message Glenn had sent her, in which he expressed his love for her and his hatred for Michael. She claimed that this text message made her aware of the impending attack, which she felt powerless to prevent. However, the police quickly noticed a major problem with the notes Glenn had written about the murder plan. They were full of spelling errors. In contrast, the text message Bianca received was perfectly written, too perfectly, and it resembled her own writing style. This led the police to suspect that she had sent the text messages from Glenn's phone to create a false narrative. Bianca denied any involvement in the crime and claimed she knew nothing about it. Despite the strong case against Bianca, the police did not have enough evidence to charge her at the time. She dismissed the charges and denied any involvement in the murder. As a result, she was released, and the investigation continued. During this time, Bianca became bored and returned to Tinder in search of new dates. Just 3 weeks after Glenn's death, she met a man who had just been released from prison on parole. He had a history of violent crime, including the murder of his first wife by slitting her throat in front of their 6-year-old son. Early in their relationship, Bianca informed him that her third husband, Glenn, had died of cancer just weeks after they were to marry. Bianca was pregnant but unfortunately lost the baby in an accident. Her new boyfriend later discovered Glenn and Michael online. He confronted her about the incident, and she revealed that she had planned the murder but insisted that Glenn should not die. She explained that she was too scared to share this with him when they first met, worried that he would not want to continue their relationship. Bianca also admitted to sending text messages from her husband's phone to mislead the investigation. She expressed deep regret for Glenn's death, explaining that she only intended to get rid of Michael. Her motive was fear that he might gain custody of their son. Following Bianca's confession, she became panicked and expressed fear of being caught by the police. Her boyfriend reported her statements to the police. In April 2018, Bianca was questioned again. Despite her boyfriend's testimony, she continued to deny sending the text messages, claiming that she had never seen any maps of Michael's house and denying any involvement in any plans to kill her ex-husband. The police informed her that her fingerprints had been found on the handgun used in the shooting. She was initially unable to respond to this information but continued to deny that custody issues were a motive for the crime. When the police recounted her boyfriend's account, she admitted that she could not remember the conversation. During this time, Bianca suffered from depression after the loss of her child, which she attributed to her mental health and the effects of her antidepressants. Unfortunately, the police determined that they did not have enough evidence to arrest her and were forced to release her. This situation continued until June 2019. Meanwhile, the police had gathered enough evidence to prove that she had either incited or directly participated in the murder of her ex-husband, Michael. The case was delayed, and it was not until June 2022 that hearings began regarding her involvement in Michael's murder. The prosecutor's office believes that Bianca's main motive was her desire to avoid sharing custody of her child and her fear that the father might take the child away. The police discovered that Bianca had planned to imprison her third husband, Glenn, to remove him from her life, as she found him too old and was bored with him. However, the attack did not go as planned, resulting in the deaths of both Michael and Glenn. The prosecution argued that Bianca had written a text message pretending to be Glenn to create an alibi. They also revealed that the outing with Glenn's mother was part of the plan for the crime. To convince the jury, they thoroughly analyzed all the recordings of conversations and text messages. All available evidence was presented, including a map that Bianca was said to have drawn. Bianca's DNA and fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, which clearly indicated that she had lied. Her attorney claimed that this was only circumstantial evidence. It was believed that Glenn disliked Michael because of his relationship with her son. However, several witnesses testified for the prosecution, claiming that Bianca had long wanted to get rid of Michael, her ex-husband, due to a custody dispute. Even Bianca's mother testified in court that the day after the murder, her daughter called to confess that Glenn should not have died and that it was her fault. Bianca claimed that the fingerprints found on the murder weapon were the result of an intimate encounter between her and Glenn. She stated that he was aroused when she pointed the gun at him, but this explanation seemed implausible and did not account for her dishonesty during the interrogations. A few weeks after she began contacting her new boyfriend, Bianca discovered that she was pregnant again. He offered to recant his statement to the police if she forgave him and returned to him, but Bianca believed that the real father of the child was someone else. The jury deliberated on the complicated case but could not reach a unanimous verdict, leading to the cancellation of the original hearings. A retrial began in August, but it was also found to be flawed due to arguments that violated court rules. In December 2022, the case returned to court, this time with all the evidence gathered during the investigation presented. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including text messages exchanged between Bianca and Glenn. In these messages, Bianca mentioned celebrating a special day, although she had no legitimate reason for the occasion. This implied a connection to the murder. Ultimately, the jury concluded that Bianca was the cunning mastermind behind this terrible crime. 2 lives were lost, one of which was cruelly deceived. People were horrified by the level of manipulation Glenn faced before his death. Bianca recognized his weakness and exploited it to her own advantage, trying to achieve multiple goals at once. However, Glenn's death was not part of her plan. She mistakenly believed she could convince her husband to admit his guilt and escape the consequences. Bianca Edmonds was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Her children were placed in foster care with relatives, leaving them without parental care. In the peaceful town of Monroe, North Carolina, Kimberly Medlin thought she understood the sources of danger in her life. She worried about intoxicated patrons at the club, unfamiliar people on desolate roads. However, she never suspected that the true danger was observing her, not from the shadows, but from behind the wheel of a police car, studying her routines, tendencies, and anxieties. This is not just the story of a brutal murder. It is the story of how one man turned the symbol of safety into a hunting license, and how a young woman, who did everything right, never made it home. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was born on December 1, 1970. She was cheerful, bright-spirited, and had a warm, welcoming smile. People were naturally drawn to her. After graduating high school, she met the love of her life, a young man named Bridger Medlin. Around that time, she began pursuing her education and working steadily. The couple later married and settled on a small horse farm in Monroe, North Carolina. By 1997, Kim was both a student and a hard-working young woman balancing two jobs to support her small family. She was a passionate horseback rider, dreamed of owning her own riding stable one day. Bridger worked tirelessly as well. Together, they planned to finish school, build stable careers, and eventually start a family. But they had no idea that fate was quietly preparing something far darker. Kim worked as a sales associate at a clothing store and also waited tables at a popular men's club in the city. It was a loud, high-energy environment where fights sometimes broke out among intoxicated customers or occasionally even between staff. This happened often enough that Kim hardly reacted to it anymore. She and her co-workers knew how to handle rowdy patrons. Security guards typically diffused situations before they escalated. This wasn't always effective, but the establishment was well known to law enforcement. A police officer could always be called if a situation got out of hand. Such incidents occurred during Kim's shifts, but they were rare, and she managed them with her usual calm. But none of that could protect her from what happened early one March morning in 1997 as she drove home from work. At first, Kim noticed that an unfamiliar vehicle seemed to be following her as she left the club. She changed lanes, slowed down, and sped up to test her suspicion, but the car mimicked her every move. Fearful, she contacted law enforcement. By the time she pulled up behind a patrol car parked along a quiet stretch of road, the pursuer had already sped away. Perhaps realizing his intentions had been discovered, he avoided a direct encounter with the police. Deeply shaken, Kim explained the frightening incident to the officers. They took her statement seriously, reassured her, and opened a report. She admitted this wasn't the first time she had noticed someone suspicious trailing her. Officers documented everything carefully, though the details were too limited to identify the stalker. Even so, they had no intention of ignoring her warning. From that moment on, patrol officers were alerted about the suspicious individual and his vehicle. Kim returned to her routine, working and studying as usual. Only 2 weeks passed after she filed the report. At 4 a.m. on March 29, 1997, an officer on patrol spotted a red SUV pulled over on the side of the road. It didn't look like an accident. The vehicle appeared abandoned. Its engine was running, the headlights were still on, and no one was inside. When officers began examining the car, the situation immediately became alarming. Inside, they found signs of a struggle. Strands of light-colored hair and several small drops of blood on the driver's side. Kim's belongings were inside, her wallet, cash, cards, and various personal items. A quick check of the license plates confirmed that the vehicle belonged to Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin. But Kim herself was nowhere in sight. And just like that, a quiet countryside road became the beginning of one of North Carolina's most unsettling murder cases. The first call investigators made was to Kim's home, but no one answered. Early that same morning, her husband, Bridger Medlin, arrived at the police station in person to report that his wife had not returned home after her shift at the men's club. There was no logical explanation for Kim's disappearance, and Bridger was visibly shaken. He remembered the frightening incident weeks earlier when someone had followed her on the road, and he feared that one of the club's customers, or perhaps the same stalker, might have harmed his wife. The abandoned SUV suggested that something terrible had happened. Detectives had already processed the vehicle and found nothing of significant value inside, so they moved on to the surrounding area. Outside, they noticed markings on the ground, what looked like a faint, disturbed trail. Following it and widening the search perimeter, investigators made a grim discovery the very next day. Kim's body had been dumped at the end of a dead-end road, roughly 3 kilometers from where her SUV had been found. Nothing had been taken from the vehicle. Jewelry was still on her body, her wedding ring remained on her finger, and a gold bracelet was still on her wrist. It was immediately clear this had not been a robbery. Kim had been brutally beaten. According to the autopsy, she sustained multiple blows, punched, kicked, and strangled over a prolonged period. There were no signs of abuse, but her back and neck were covered in severe bruises. Many of the marks had a distinctive shape, yet they did not match any common weapon either. The violence had been intense and deliberate. Even in areas of skin that are usually thick and therefore less prone to bruising, deep bruises can still be found. The perpetrator seemed to harbor fierce hatred for his victim. Based on the injuries, Kim appeared to have been ambushed from behind, forced to the ground, and subjected to immense pressure on her back and neck, possibly from the killer stomping on her, causing fractures. There was also evidence indicating she had been restrained. Marks around her wrists suggested immobilization, though no bindings were recovered at the scene. The impressions did not match tape, rope, or zip ties. Experienced forensic experts noted the pattern was highly unusual. To understand who might have attacked the defenseless young woman, detectives began reconstructing her final hours. Her family and close friends cooperated fully. On the surface, none of the people in Kim's life seemed aggressive or dangerous. She had no history of mental illness, substance dependency, or risky social circles. She lived quietly and stayed away from trouble. The only environment that raised concern was her workplace. The men's club drew a wide range of customers, and tensions could escalate easily. Investigators questioned her co-workers, many of whom believed Kim's killer was likely a problematic patron. According to Kim's colleagues, she had finished her shift around 2:00 a.m. As usual, they also provided her complaint about being followed on the street, which they believe is relevant. The detectives then questioned her husband. Bridger confirmed that she called him at that time to let him know she was leaving the club, a routine she never broke. Phone records later verified his statement. Her commute normally lasted only 10 minutes. To save time, she always took a quiet, isolated shortcut road. It was along that same road that her SUV had been discovered, engine running, lights on, but driver missing. Bridger said that after speaking to Kim, he went to bed, exhausted from his long day at work. But when he woke up and started getting ready for his shift, he realized Kim had never returned home and immediately contacted police. His missing person report was filed, but detectives soon identified 2 concerning inconsistencies. First, no one could confirm that Bridger was actually home at the time he claimed. Only the phone record proved Kim had called the house. After that call, he had more than enough time to commit the crime. Second, detectives questioned his account of falling asleep so easily. How could he have gone to bed without waiting for his wife to return from a late-night shift? And how did he not notice her absence until morning? His delayed report raised doubts. Despite these concerns, Bridger behaved calmly and appeared devastated. At first glance, he seemed suspicious, but he acted very calmly. He seemed like a sincerely grieving widower who had lost his beloved. When investigators began verifying Bridger Medlin's statements, several witnesses stepped forward claiming they had seen a black van resembling his driving through town around the time Kim went missing. Bridger firmly denied any involvement, insisting he had been home the entire night. Detectives still lacked evidence to charge him with anything. But the conflicting accounts forced them to slow down and re-examine every detail. Family, friends, and colleagues were interviewed extensively to help investigators understand the dynamics of the couple's relationship. Everyone described Bridger as attentive, hard-working, and deeply devoted to his wife. Like any married couple, they had minor disagreements, but nothing even close to violent or hostile. Detectives tried to identify a motive, yet none emerged. The Medlins had no life insurance policies, no significant assets, no children, no affairs, and no discussions of divorce, factors that often contribute to spousal homicides. Suspicion surrounding Bridger weakened further when another witness came forward, claiming that Bridger's van had remained parked in the driveway all night. Although his alibi was far from airtight, investigators no longer considered him their primary focus. Attention shifted to other avenues. Based on the timeline, Kim had called her husband before driving home. She then continued along her usual route, a quiet suburban stretch of highway, before stopping unexpectedly. There was nothing on that road to make her pull over voluntarily. Detectives began to suspect that Kim had stopped because she believed she was being pulled over by law enforcement. This theory also explained the unusual marks on her wrists. Forensic examiners recognized the pattern instantly: pressure injuries consistent with metal handcuffs applied far too tightly. Then, an unexpected development occurred. A man arrived at the police station, claiming he was the same driver Kim had reported weeks earlier, the one who followed her from the men's club. He insisted he had nothing to do with her murder. He admitted he had been drunk that night and acted out of anger because Kim had removed him from the club 2 weeks earlier for inappropriate behavior. Wanting to scare her, he followed her car, but backed off when she neared a location where patrol officers usually parked. He said he came forward because he had heard that a waitress from the club had been killed and didn't want police hunting for him. His confession seemed genuine, but his alibi still had to be checked. Investigators soon confirmed he was telling the truth. On the night of Kim's murder, he had been at work during an overnight shift. Multiple co-workers and his manager backed him up. CCTV footage with timestamps also confirmed his presence. He was ruled out completely. And just like that, the list of suspects was empty again. Detectives felt trapped in a standstill. No one believed Bridger was guilty, neither Kim's family nor his own. Everyone knew him as a gentle, even-tempered man. The marriage showed no signs of trouble. There was still no motive at all. With no progress, investigators held a press conference, hoping someone from the public had seen something unusual on that isolated road during the early morning hours. Their request paid off. A motorist came forward, saying he had seen a patrol car following a vehicle matching the description of Kim's red SUV. He explained that he had driven behind both vehicles for a short distance and noticed how unnaturally synchronized their movements were, close enough to raise concern. At the time, he dismissed it. Only after watching the news did he realize the significance. Investigators showed him photographs of patrol cars from nearby jurisdictions. Based on the details he remembered, they concluded the car appeared to be a Monroe Police Department patrol vehicle. The possibility was chilling. The killer might have been someone wearing a badge. Because all patrol cars in Monroe were identical models, the witness could not identify the exact unit number, but his account aligned perfectly with the new theory. It explained why Kim had stopped on a deserted highway. She likely believed she was being pulled over by an officer she trusted, or at least someone who looked like one. By this point, investigators had already analyzed every piece of evidence they collected, but the new lead forced them to re-examine everything, especially hoping to find fingerprints or trace materials they might have missed the first time. Unfortunately, nothing useful surfaced. That was not entirely surprising. If the killer really was connected to law enforcement, he would have known exactly how to avoid leaving any trace behind. A follow-up inspection finally revealed something investigators had overlooked: a distinctive imprint left on Kim's sweatshirt. Forensic analysis determined that it was the heel mark of a woman's shoe, not a sneaker or standard boot. Alongside it was another peculiar marking, a small V-shaped imprint. The experts began searching for the manufacturer. At first, he found nothing. No popular brands used a heel design or lettering like this. He then shifted to small-scale or specialized footwear producers. He examined hundreds of models, visited stores in person, and checked suppliers who made shoes for niche professions. That was when he found an exact match. The shoes were produced by a small manufacturer in Wisconsin, a company so specialized and obscure that even in that industry, few people had heard of it. They made only a few dozen models, and one of them had the exact same heel pattern and the same letter imprint found on Kim's clothing. The next step was to determine the killer's size. By reconstructing the pressure marks and depth of the imprint, the forensic lab concluded that the perpetrator wore size 39-40. In only a matter of days, the focus of the investigation narrowed dramatically. The killer was likely a Monroe police officer wearing this rare shoe model. When detectives checked the boots of officers in the department, they found 3 who owned this exact model. 1 wore size 39 and 2 wore size 40. The first officer worked for the fire division and had been on duty the entire night of the murder. He had no connection to Kim, did not frequent the men's club, and had a strong, independently verified alibi. He was immediately removed from the list. The second officer had spent the night investigating a robbery. He was stationed at an elderly couple's house on the opposite end of town and remained in constant radio contact with dispatch. His alibi was airtight. The third officer was Josh Griffin. On the night Kim was murdered, Griffin had worked until 10:00 p.m. According to his statement, he went straight home afterward. What immediately drew attention was that he had patrolled the very stretch of highway where Kim's abandoned SUV was later found. Griffin claimed he had seen nothing unusual that night, no stopped vehicles, no suspicious activity. In theory, this made sense. By the time Kimberly left the men's club around 2:00 a.m., Josh Griffin should have been asleep at home. He insisted that after his shift he did nothing else, saying he had been too exhausted to leave his house. Investigators inspected Griffin's patrol car first. What they found was unsettling. The inside of the vehicle was spotless, as if it had been aggressively cleaned very recently. They immediately flagged this as suspicious. Griffin had a reputation for being exceptionally untidy. For years, the department joked that his patrol car was the filthiest in the fleet, and that anyone riding with him practically needed to wash their clothes afterward. Yet now, after Kim's murder, the same car was immaculate, cleaner than it had ever been since the day it was issued to him. Griffin dismissed the comments, insisting everyone was exaggerating, but investigators' suspicions were already growing. When detectives searched Griffin's home, they were especially interested in his footwear. The distinctive boots he was known to wear, the exact model that matched the imprint on Kim's sweatshirt, were nowhere to be found. When questioned, Josh claimed he had thrown them away because they had torn during his last investigation. But according to multiple colleagues, Griffin wore that particular model constantly and had never mentioned them being damaged. Suspicions surrounding Officer Josh Griffin grew even stronger. Once investigators revisited interviews with Kim's colleagues at the men's club, they confirmed that Josh was a familiar face there, a regular customer known for his temper, unsettling behavior. He often acted defiant, used his badge as a shield to intimidate people. He was generally avoided by both staff and patrons. Female employees, in particular, recalled how disrespectful and aggressive he could be. But everything changed when he first noticed Kim. It was clear he was immediately drawn to her. He repeatedly tried to strike up conversations, but Kim, modest, reserved, and married, turned him down every time. She did not like Josh, and the two had engaged in several verbal confrontations at the club, though none were serious enough to warrant formal complaints. Investigators now needed to dismantle Josh's alibi, which claimed he had been home asleep at the time of the murder. They seized his cell phone as part of the investigation. The records revealed a call made at 2:00 a.m. Not from his home, but from his patrol car. Despite the limited precision of cell tower triangulation at the time, detectives determined he had been parked at an intersection just outside the men's club parking lot. The spot provided a perfect view of the club entrance. It was now clear that Josh had not been home at all. When confronted with these findings, he changed his story. He claimed that after his shift ended, he had simply stayed in his patrol car to read a book. The call at 2:00 a.m., he said, was him requesting a tow truck for a stranger who had approached him for help with a broken-down vehicle. This new explanation only raised more questions. According to the timeline, Kim drove past that exact intersection roughly 30 minutes later, taking her usual shortcut home. Josh Griffin, therefore, had ample opportunity to follow her without raising suspicion, as he was in full uniform and driving a marked police car. Even so, Josh continued to deny any involvement. Because the evidence was still circumstantial, he was released pending further investigation. More troubling information emerged shortly afterward. Several of Griffin's co-workers admitted they had heard him talk repeatedly about a girl in a red SUV he found attractive. He had made comments, some inappropriate, about Kim more than once. It became clear that his interest in her was not casual but obsessive. As rumors spread that the killer might be a police officer, Monroe's police department initially resisted the idea. No one wanted a scandal implicating one of their own, but the leak proved unexpectedly helpful. Multiple young women came forward reporting that a patrol officer had harassed them. They described being followed in their cars, approached on isolated roads, and confronted in public places. The pattern was unmistakable. Josh Griffin had used his badge to intimidate women for years. But Kim had rejected him firmly, and that rejection only intensified his fixation. Soon the theory became clear. Investigators believed Griffin had driven to the area near the club specifically because he knew Kim would be leaving work. He had studied her routine and waited until the perfect moment. They suspected he followed her onto the rural road where she usually drove home. Then, using the authority of his uniform and patrol car, he forced her to pull over. She likely believed it was an ordinary traffic stop, until she realized the truth. Detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Griffin handcuffed Kim, dragged her off the road, and launched into a sustained attack. He beat her, choked her using what was likely a police flashlight, and applied such force to her neck, back that he fractured her vertebrae, standing on her body with full weight. That was when the distinctive heel imprint from his shoe pressed into her sweatshirt. In February 1998, Josh Griffin was charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. He continued to deny all accusations, but the evidence against him had grown overwhelming. During the preliminary hearing, numerous witnesses testified, including the motorist who had reported seeing a patrol car tailing Kim's SUV, several officers who worked alongside Griffin, and multiple women who had previously been harassed by him. The defense attempted to portray Griffin as a respectable officer, but the community knew better. Witness after witness described his volatile temper, inappropriate comments, and reckless abuse of authority. In February 1998, after closing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Josh Griffin was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years went by before Griffin finally requested a recorded interview with investigators. In that meeting, he admitted to everything. He said he couldn't fully explain what pushed him to commit such a horrific act, but he confirmed much of what detectives had long suspected. He acknowledged that he tried to approach Kim multiple times, and when she firmly rejected him, something inside him snapped. He confessed that he kidnapped her, handcuffed her, beat her, stomped on her, and strangled her with his police flashlight. After killing her, he took her driver's license. Griffin said he tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. As for the missing pair of shoes, he admitted that he discarded them in a dumpster behind a local supermarket on the same morning of the murder. He realized those distinctive footprints could track him down and panicked. By confessing, Josh Griffin said he finally felt he had cleared his conscience. His sentence, however, remains unchanged. What happened to Kim is more than a tragic crime. It is a warning, a reminder that power without integrity becomes a weapon, and that the people we depend on the most can sometimes be the ones who betray that trust in the most horrific way. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was a daughter, a wife, a friend, a woman with dreams, goals, and a future that should never have been stolen. Her story continues to echo through Monroe. Delphine Jubilar. Born in 1987 in Gaillac, she worked nights as a nurse, juggling that demanding schedule with raising 2 children. The family lived in Cagnac-Les Mines, where life seemed routine and predictable. On the surface, everything appeared stable and ordinary. Early in the morning on December 16, 2020, a little after 4:00 a.m., Cedric Jubilar called the emergency services to report that his wife, Delphine, had been missing for several hours. He said he had last seen her late the previous evening. He was unable to give an exact time, instead mentioning a vague window between around 11:00 p.m. and the early hours of the morning, according to Cedric. Before contacting the authorities, he tried to reach Delphine on his own. He messaged one of Delphine's close friends, assuming she might have gone to stay with her friend. In that message, he asked the friend to tell Delphine to come home. The response came quickly. Delphine was not there. Cedric couldn't get in touch with her. But he waited until after sunrise to contact the police. He explained that he hoped she would come back by herself overnight. However, phone records later revealed that Cedric had been awake, moving around the house, and repeatedly turning the Wi-Fi on and off between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Behavior investigators viewed as highly suspicious. The police were there immediately. A thorough sweep of the house and backyard revealed no signs that Delphine had left during the night. Her car remained in the garage. Her belongings were untouched, and both children were asleep in their beds. Officers observed nothing to suggest she had planned to go anywhere, especially not in the middle of the night. These early findings immediately cast doubt on Cedric's version of events, marking the true beginning of the investigation. 2 neighbors testified they heard a terrifying scream coming from the Jubilar home shortly after 11 p.m. Louis, the couple's 6-year-old son, reported hearing his parents argue loudly last night. He also said to investigators, "His father screamed, his mother fell." A statement that became one of the most important early clues. When police entered the home, there were no signs of an attack. Everything appeared normal. No disturbance. However, in a disturbing detail, investigators discovered that the couple's blanket was found in the drum of the washing machine, despite it being summer. Inside the machine, detectives also found fragments of Cedric's broken glasses, raising even more suspicions about a violent incident occurring before the wash cycle was started. Authorities then deployed K-9 teams, thermal cameras, drones, and ground units to comb through the surrounding areas of Cagnac-les-Mines. Locals rallied quickly as well, forming volunteer search parties. Within days, nearly 1,000 people were scouring the rugged landscape. Steep ravines, dense underbrush, and narrow trails that required caution, precision. In one of the most difficult to access locations, investigators found several of her personal items: her phone, pieces of clothing, and a knife. The area was completely unlit, and the scattered arrangement of the objects suggested they had been thrown or placed there, not accidentally dropped during a walk. Even more puzzling, there were no physical traces showing she had made her way there independently. Officers noted that even with a strong flashlight, the nighttime route would have been incredibly difficult. Forensic experts later concluded the items had likely been staged to simulate a voluntary disappearance or nighttime walk. A theory that strengthened suspicions of deliberate manipulation. Forensic analysis of her phone added another disturbing detail. The device's last recorded signal came on the morning of December 16th, just over a mile from her home. Moments later, it abruptly shut down, not from a drained battery, but from what appeared to be a sudden, intentional interruption. This sharp cutoff became a critical clue. In January and February 2021, Delphine's phone exhibited strange behavior. It seemed to automatically activate internal functions, sending short, individual signals. This led investigators to wonder if someone had remotely accessed or physically tampered with the phone. They contacted Samsung for answers. Samsung stated that these signals could occur during extensive diagnostic tests. Automated checks might trigger background signals that phone companies interpret as the phone turning on. Despite this explanation, investigators considered several possibilities: a software error, remote access, or unintended consequences from examining the phone during the investigation. No cause was definitively eliminated. In addition to the technical analysis, detectives investigated Delphine's personal life, focusing on her communication with a man she was dating. They had been making future plans, and she sent him a personal photo the night before she disappeared. However, his alibi was quickly confirmed by independent sources, proving he was home all night. Investigators then looked into his wife, Kate, the day before Delphine went missing. Kate called Delphine's phone several times. While this created tension, investigators found no solid evidence connecting Kate to Delphine's disappearance. It seemed more like a personal dispute than a criminal lead. Meanwhile, Delphine's extramarital affair also made investigators suspect Cedric. Another man briefly drew attention early in the investigation, someone who had previously been involved in a car-related dispute with the Jubilar family. Despite the past tension, his involvement was quickly ruled out. He provided a solid, independently verified alibi, so investigators found no reason to pursue him further. Neighbors also mentioned a van that had been parked near Jubilar home for several days before Delphine's disappearance. Investigators located the owner, conducted interviews, and reviewed his movements. After comparing times, routes, and phone data, no connection to the case was found. Investigators then focused on Delphine's car. Her vehicle was parked differently than usual. The position didn't match her habits. Inside, investigators found fresh condensation on the windows, a sign that someone had recently been inside. One theory was that the car had been used during the night and later returned. As interviews continued, inconsistencies accumulated. The times Cedric mentioned didn't align with digital timestamps. Several aspects of his story shifted between statements. He initially claimed Delphine went out to walk the dog, but the dog was found clean, dry, and asleep, with no signs of having been outdoors on a cold December night. This contradiction became one of the central elements of the case. This pattern, behavioral oddities, shifting details, and tech data not matching the story, gradually pushed Cedric to the center of the investigation. On June 16th, officers arrived at the Jubilar home early in the morning, conducted a full search in the presence of official witnesses, and took Cedric into custody. He was formally named a suspect in Delphine's disappearance and the alleged concealment of her body. Following the arrest, investigators expanded their focus to examine Cedric's personal history. He was orphaned at a young age and placed in various foster homes. According to those who knew him, this upbringing left him with deep insecurities, a strong need for approval, and emotional immaturity beneath a facade of independence. Some described him as diligent, while others said he could be manipulative, evasive, unable to cope with pressure. Within the Jubilar household, there were clear imbalances. Delphine had stable employment, steady income, long-term career prospects. Meanwhile, Cedric's work was inconsistent. He often depended on his wife's financial stability. Investigators also discovered that Cedric had searched online weeks earlier for how to kill someone with a knife without making noise, a chilling detail later presented at trial. After completing crucial forensic examinations, tactical teams resumed active field operations. They searched caves, abandoned tunnels, dense wooded ravines, and steep, hazardous terrain requiring specialized mountaineering support. The regions surrounding Cagnac-les mines were combed once again, this time with advanced thermal imaging drones and technical teams capable of accessing difficult locations. Authorities were determined to leave no possibility unexplored. The extensive searches highlighted the serious nature of Delphine's disappearance. Even in the initial hours, when missing people typically leave clues, investigators found nothing. There was no safe route she could have taken at night, no indication she left willingly, and no sign her body had been moved. This complete lack of evidence was a major red flag for investigators. It suggested that whatever happened to Delphine likely occurred in or very close to her home. A specific location quickly became a focal point: an abandoned, fire-damaged farm. A former cellmate of Cedric Jubilar alleged that he had heard Cedric admit to burying Delphine's body there. Consequently, investigators conducted a thorough search of the farm. They used ground-penetrating radar, digging equipment, and meticulously examined every section of soil. However, the search yielded no results. They found no bones, clothing fibers, or any biological evidence. There was nothing to indicate that the farm had ever been used as a burial site. Meanwhile, DNA testing was difficult because Delphine's body was never found. Without her body, investigators couldn't get a confirmed DNA sample to compare with any evidence they found. This meant DNA tests couldn't give definitive results. Investigators also conducted a meticulous forensic sweep of the Peugeot 207 Delphine drove. They examined the trunk, cabin, floor mats, and all interior compartments. No signs of a struggle, movement of heavy objects, or attempts to clean up biological material were detected. Vehicle data logs showed no nighttime trips and no unusual changes in mileage, reducing the likelihood that her car had played any role in the disappearance. Following Cédric's arrest, his lawyers focused on the lack of direct evidence against him. They filed 7 motions asking for him to be released, arguing that because there was no body or physical evidence after so much time, he should no longer be held in custody. However, the court rejected each motion, stating that there was not enough reason to alter the terms of his imprisonment. His lawyers also argued that the isolation, limited communication, and being treated as the primary suspect for an extended period caused him excessive psychological distress. These points were key to a public campaign that depicted Cédric as being detained without significant proof. Prosecutors, however, firmly opposed Cédric's release. They highlighted contradictions in his statements, the risk that he could influence witnesses, and the possibility that he might hide or destroy information still being evaluated. In complex, bodiless cases like this, judicial decisions hinge not only on hard evidence but also on assessments of potential risks. This reasoning explains why the court repeatedly rejected every request for his release. Legal arguments stretched on for months. Both sides continued strengthening their positions, yet the outcome never changed. Cédric remained in custody while investigators moved forward with the case. In 2023, volunteers launched a new round of searches, focusing on rugged areas previously inaccessible due to steep terrain and dense vegetation. But this effort also ended in disappointment. Not a single clue surfaced. The case finally reached trial in September 2025 at the Cour d'Assises du Tarn in Albi. The prosecution presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, the scream heard by neighbors at 11:00 p.m., Cédric's inconsistent timelines, the washing machine running at 4:00 a.m. with a duvet inside, broken glasses found in the washing machine, his son's testimony, his "How to Kill Quietly" Google searches, and his own recorded prison conversations, in which he appeared to mock the investigation. On October 17, 2025, after 4 weeks of hearings and 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Cédric Jubillar guilty of the murder of his wife Delphine. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, the exact term requested by the prosecution. The court rejected the defense's argument of accidental death during a domestic argument and fully accepted the prosecution's reconstruction. A premeditated act, driven by jealousy and rage after Delphine announced her intention to leave him for another man. Right after the verdict was announced, Cédric Jubillar's lawyers said they would appeal. As of December 2, 2025, the appeal is in progress, and Cédric Jubillar is still in jail. Delphine's body has never been found. Despite the conviction, her family continues to search, refusing to bury an empty coffin. They insist that one day they will bring Delphine home. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, he began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself, someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with two mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert McDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, McDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, rather than sharing McDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. McDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert McDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence. In a quiet town deep in rural Brazil, the gentle light of a small house cut through the darkness. Inside, Valdemir Hochler, husband, father, and a hard-working man who split his days between driving and caring for cattle, was living what no one realized would be his final night. Within those familiar walls, love turned into jealousy, and fear grew into something far more dangerous. By morning, Valdemir had vanished. No phone calls, no messages, just an absence that immediately felt wrong. His sons searched the roads he often drove, while neighbors whispered and police joined the effort. Still, nothing surfaced, until suspicion turned toward the house where he was last seen. In that house, there was a freezer that was still strangely forbidden. Days later, when the police finally opened the freezer, the truth inside was cold, silent, and beyond imagination. What truly happened in that house on November 14th? How did a family built over decades collapse into betrayal, fear, and a discovery that would stun an entire community? Valdemir Hochler was born in 1979 in Brazil, into a large family. From a young age, He learned the meaning of responsibility and hard work. As an adult, he was loved by everyone for his kind and trustworthy character. He made a living as a driver and also managed a small cattle business in the countryside. His life seemed stable. Valdemir married Janet, a woman he loved deeply, and they had 2 sons, Jonathan and Matthias. For a while, their family was very happy. However, when Matthias was less than a year old, everything changed. Valdemir confessed to Janet that he had an affair and a child from another relationship. The woman was Claudia Fernanda Tavares, a former teacher who worked in the dairy industry. She gave birth to a baby girl named Gabriella, just a few months after Matthias was born. This truth devastated Janet. She felt betrayed and did not know how to cope. Despite her heartbreak, she chose not to divorce, hoping Valdemir would eventually end his affair and return to their family. For a time, Valdemir moved in with Claudia to help care for their newborn daughter, Gabriella. Claudia gave up her job to focus on raising Gabriella. Over time, the children began to form bonds, with Gabriella often visiting Jonathan and Matthias. The 3 brothers played happily together, unaware of the tension between the adults. For Janet, life became a series of tiring days. Claudia constantly harassed her family, followed them on the streets and tried to disrupt their lives. Even during family gatherings, Claudia's presence made everyone uneasy. One time, when Valdemir was taking Janet and the children to her mother's birthday party, Claudia followed them in her car. The pursuit was so intense that Janet tried to hide inside the vehicle to avoid being seen. Claudia tailed them for miles until they finally managed to get away. An experience Janet later called sheer madness, but it didn't stop there. Claudia even visited their home, even when they were entertaining friends. Each time Valdemir was discovered, he had to go into hiding to avoid trouble. Her control over him seemed to grow, and she could not accept his ongoing contact with Janetti, whom she viewed as a rival. The harassment continued over the phone. Claudia called their home repeatedly, using harsh words to insult Janete and her relatives. Claudia bragged about her relationship with Valdemir and mocked Janete, saying that she was just a maid and that her husband loathed her. Yet according to Janet, those claims were far from reality. Finally, because she was so tired and could not bear it anymore, Janet decided to end everything. She packed up Valdemir's belongings, brought them to Claudia's house, and left them there, forcing him to leave. From that day on, Valdemir lived with Claudia. Despite this, Valdemir maintained a relationship with his 2 sons, Jonathan and Matthias. They met regularly, went out, ate, and enjoyed happy moments together. Occasionally, Janete joined in, and despite the tensions, Valdemir always maintained a respectful attitude towards her. Valdemir continued to support his children financially and emotionally, ensuring they never lacked. Over time, despite the family being broken, they gradually found a balance. On weekends, the whole family sometimes gathered to eat, and in those moments, Valdemir's hearty laughter and cheerful personality warmed the atmosphere. Jonathan had started a family of his own. Like his younger brother, Matthias, he visited their father about once a month. On the contrary, Gabriella chose a different path at the age of 18. She left home to live independently. Her relationship with her father became distant, but she stayed close to her mother, Claudia. By mid-2022, after years of ups and downs, Valdemir and Claudia finally got married. Around that same time, Valdemir was facing a major loss: the death of his father. The inheritance that followed led to new conflicts among his siblings. Some of Valdemir's assets and funds were not in his name but managed through his sons and trusted associates. Even with the challenges, he kept a stable income as a driver, received a pension, and maintained his livestock business. He dreamed of using his inheritance to buy more land and ensure a stable future for his children. In early November 2022, Jonathan, his wife, and their 3 small children visited Valdemir and Claudia at their home. Although Jonathan remains somewhat suspicious of Claudia, finding her too strict, he remains polite and attends family gatherings. That weekend, a few of their friends also came to the gathering. Everything seemed normal. The group ate together, laughed, and shared stories late into the night. Jonathan and his family even decided to stay overnight, but the following week, Matthias and Jonathan noticed that their father, Valdemir, is unusually quiet. By Tuesday, November 15, 2022, worry turned to panic. Valdemir, known for being punctual and responsible, failed to show up for work. A colleague called Claudia to ask about him, but she surprisingly replied that she did not know where he was. Within hours, she reported him missing to the police. The news was not delivered directly to Janette and her sons, but through a family acquaintance. Jonathan feared that his father might have fainted or suffered an accident while working. Family members rushed to the rural areas he often visited, but the search turned up nothing. As time passed, rumors began to spread. Some have suggested that Valdemir may have harmed himself, but his family has dismissed that idea. They knew him as cheerful and full of plans for the future, financially stable, caring for his animals, and deeply devoted to his children. A more believable theory was that he had left home temporarily, perhaps after a disagreement with Claudia. Still, no one could foresee the truth that was about to emerge. Jonathan and his wife decided to put aside their suspicions and stay with Claudia to help with the search. That evening, the area around Claudia's house was tense. Police, firefighters, and neighbors searched the property for any sign of Valdemir. Jonathan looked through his father's phone, but found nothing that explained his sudden disappearance. Claudia insisted the previous weekend had been uneventful. They had eaten pizza with friends and spent Sunday peacefully together. Her story sounded reassuring, but small details began to raise doubts. That night, Jonathan and his wife stayed at the house. Claudia refused to sleep in her bedroom, choosing instead to stay on the living room sofa, saying she wanted to be awake in case her husband came back. From that spot, she had a clear view of the refrigerator. When Jonathan went to get a glass of water, Claudia reacted strangely, as if the sight of him opening the fridge made her uneasy. He dismissed it at the time, thinking she was just anxious and grieving, but in the following days, her behavior continued to draw attention. Claudia became unusually protective of the refrigerator, refusing to let anyone else open it and insisting on serving all the food herself to those helping with the search. On Saturday, November 19, 3 days after Claudia reported Valdemir missing, she was summoned to the police station to give an official statement. Investigators did not yet see her as a suspect, but because of her close relationship with Valdemir, questioning her was unavoidable. During the interview, officers noticed visible injuries on her body, marks that looked like signs of a struggle. When asked, she agreed to undergo a forensic examination. However, shortly after leaving the station, she vanished. Around the same time, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A neighbor came forward with crucial information, something strange he had noticed that made him uneasy for days. Everyone knew Claudia's freezer was usually empty. She rarely stocked it beyond a few basic items. But when police entered her home, they found the freezer unusually full, packed with food that no one remembered her buying. The sight immediately struck investigators as suspicious. With the search having yielded no results and the case becoming increasingly confusing, the police decided to examine the freezer closely. As they began to remove each layer of items, the horrifying truth gradually emerged. Hidden beneath the frozen food was the body of Valdemir, 43 years old. Preserved in the freezer, Claudia had carefully guarded. Preliminary evidence pointed to a horrifying scenario. Investigators believed Claudia had cleared the freezer, placed her husband's body inside, and then covered it with food to disguise the crime. The discovery shocked the community. Within hours, an arrest warrant was issued for her. As the news spread, People thought the search for Claudia would be prolonged, but shortly after, she appeared at the police station to surrender. Before that, she recorded a video and posted it online, declaring her readiness to take responsibility before the law. During the interrogation, Claudia confessed to killing Valdemir. She said she lived in fear, was constantly threatened by her husband, and believed he could kill her at any time. She insisted that her actions were in self-defense. According to her account, on the night of November 14, 2022, she gave Valdemir a sleeping pill. Once he was unconscious, she tied his limbs using techniques she had learned from her work on dairy farms. She said she briefly hesitated, realizing the seriousness of her actions, but thoughts of her own safety and her daughter's pushed her forward. She admitted to suffocating him with a plastic bag. Claudia described him as a jealous and abusive man. She recalled an incident 2 weeks earlier when he slapped her in public, which she said was the breaking point. On the night of the murder, he had forbade her from attending a New Year's party with co-workers, again asserting control. In her version, the killing was not planned revenge but a desperate act of survival. Afterward, she told investigators she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. Her defense attorney reinforced this view, portraying her as a woman driven to the edge by years of physical and psychological abuse. But the evidence told another story. Her injuries, inconsistencies in her testimony, and the gruesome effort to hide the body suggested something far darker. Authorities charged her, then 40 years old, with aggravated murder, concealment of a corpse, and making false statements. As her story spread across news outlets and social media, the case ignited national debate in Brazil about domestic violence, mental health, and the thin line between victimhood and accountability. For Valdemir's family, however, no explanation could ease the pain. The discovery shattered their lives. Jonathan, especially, could not move past one unsettling memory. During the days they searched for Valdemir, he and his wife had stayed at Claudia's house. She insisted on serving the meals herself and never let anyone open the freezer. At the time, he found it odd but thought little of it. After learning the truth, that moment haunted him while volunteers moved around the house helping. Claudia calmly took food from the refrigerator, the same place where her husband's body had been hidden, frozen in silence. For Gabriela, the revelation was unbearable. She had lost her father in the most unimaginable way, and the woman accused of killing him was her own mother. She was both shocked and filled with compassion. Despite her fear and hurt, she tried to be there for Claudia, the only mother she had left. Janet, Jonathan, and Matheus understood that she was facing the greatest loss of all. Whatever their grief, they couldn't ignore that Gabriela was now a young woman without a father and with a mother in custody. Claudia stood by her version of events. She told investigators she had acted to protect her daughter, claiming Valdemir was jealous of her bond with Gabriela. She said Gabriela's decision to leave the house was due to the toxic environment Valdemir created. Meanwhile, the grim logistics of death unfolded slowly. Defrosting Valdemir's body took several days, delaying the wake and forcing relatives to endure prolonged anguish. When the funeral finally took place, what should have been a private farewell turned into a public spectacle. The media swarmed the ceremony, drawn by the shocking details of the case. Cameras flashed. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers stood by. Adding to the already distraught family's despair, investigators eventually reached a clear conclusion: Claudia had acted with premeditation. Still, one question lingered. Had she acted alone? Some suspected an accomplice, someone who might have helped move or hide the body. But according to the civil police, all evidence indicated that Claudia acted by herself. Even Valdemir's relatives, initially doubtful that she could have managed alone, came to agree. If she had help, they reasoned, the body would likely have been disposed of in a more typical way, perhaps abandoned in a vehicle or buried somewhere remote. The decision to use the freezer suggested that she had acted impulsively, out of fear and pressure. The motive, however, remained uncertain. Investigators uncovered conflicting accounts about Valdemir's character. One of his sisters had once accused him of violent behavior, though further inquiry revealed the dispute was likely linked to disagreements over inherited property rather than abuse. Records also showed that Claudia had filed a domestic violence complaint in 2019. The alleged incident happened during a heated argument about Gabriella's wish to move away for school, a decision fiercely opposed by her father. Claudia had helped her daughter leave without his permission. When Valdemir discovered what had happened, the conflict escalated. Later, he accused Claudia of taking a large sum of money from the house, money he believed was meant to help Gabriella move. Claudia, in turn, claimed that he had taken it himself, for Janet. Hearing these claims was excruciating. She refused to believe that Valdemir had ever been violent, describing him instead as a man dedicated to his family. Another detail that complicated the case: Valdemir kept a large sum of cash at home, intended to be used to buy land, estimated to be between $38,000 and $50,000. One of his brothers claimed to have seen the money with his own eyes. In addition, Valdemir often sent money to relatives or trusted friends, raising suspicions that Claudia may have been motivated by greed, not just fear or self-defense. Some family members believed that she had been well prepared, had her intentions for a long time, and was just waiting for the right moment to act. They believe Claudia struck just before Valdemir installed a new security camera system, which would have exposed her every move. In August 2023, the case resurfaced when a court in Santa Catarina granted Claudia conditional release with electronic monitoring. She was permitted to work at a construction plant during the day and as a restaurant cook at night while awaiting trial. The decision sparked public outrage, with many viewing it as a miscarriage of justice. Soon afterward, the Superior Court of Justice reversed the ruling, citing the seriousness of the crime, the concealment of the body, and Claudia's attempts to mislead investigators. She was again placed in preventive detention. Her lawyer continued to defend her under a contingency agreement, stating he would only collect payment if she were acquitted. He has publicly expressed his belief that Claudia is completely convinced of her innocence. The trial of Claudia Fernanda Tavares began at 9 a.m. on Thursday, August 28, 2025, and lasted until dawn the following day. The witness testimony alone took up more than 11 hours. Before the jury, Claudia Fernanda Tavares, 43, was sentenced to 20 years and 24 days in a strict prison regime, with aggravating circumstances, for the murder of her husband, Valdemir Hochler, 52, a driver. The case of Valdemir Hochler remains one of the most disturbing in recent Brazilian history. For his family and friends, the loss left a lasting wound. The man they once loved and trusted was dead, and the woman who once confessed her love to him was accused of causing his death. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Yu Young-chul. Yu Young-chul was born on April 18, 1970, into a poor family in Gochang County, South Korea. He had a challenging childhood, as he was bullied at school due to his family's low social status. This early experience of poverty is believed to have fueled his resentment toward wealthier individuals, as some of his future victims were affluent people. Yu and his siblings were abandoned by their mother at a young age. One day, their mother left them at their grandmother's house and never returned. The children were left to live in severe poverty with their elderly, ailing grandmother. Eventually, their father took them in and moved them to live with him and their new stepmother. However, the situation did not improve, as their stepmother treated them cruelly. Tragedy struck again in 1985 when Yu's father died in a traffic accident. Determined to change his life, Yu resolved to work hard and find success to escape poverty. He enrolled in an art school, but his time there was difficult. He was rejected and ostracized by his fellow students, who regarded him as mediocre. In 1988, he decided to attend the technical school to earn any available qualifications. However, instead of focusing on his studies, Yu turned to a life of crime in an attempt to make money quickly. Unfortunately for him, his criminal endeavors were largely unsuccessful. At the age of 18, Yu was arrested for stealing from a wealthy neighbor. He was sent to a juvenile detention center, but the consequences didn't end there. Since he could no longer attend his technical school classes, he was expelled, marking the beginning of a downward spiral. Yu didn't stop stealing. His thefts escalated to more valuable items, including cash and eventually cars. In 1991, he was arrested again for stealing from his landlord. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in jail, giving him time to reflect on his actions. Despite his criminal record, his girlfriend, who worked as a masseuse, agreed to marry him, and they had a son together. However, instead of focusing on family life, Yu returned to stealing. He was caught stealing a car and sentenced to another 8 months in jail. Around the same time, Yu was diagnosed with epilepsy, leading to a brief stay in a medical facility before returning to his normal life. Interestingly, this epilepsy diagnosis would later become something he used to his advantage. Yu was no stranger to breaking the law for personal gain and had a history of similar crimes, which he regarded as only harming insurance companies. However, over time, he escalated from minor thefts to more serious offenses, becoming increasingly corrupt and unhinged. Yu served a 2-year prison sentence for illegally selling adult photos. Upon his release, he resumed stealing, eventually landing back in prison for another 3 years. Meanwhile, Yu's wife silently shouldered the responsibility of raising their son while he repeatedly committed theft and faced arrests. Her patience finally ran out in the year 2000 when he was accused of abusing a young girl and was subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. This prompted her to file for divorce. During the investigation and while Yu was in custody, she reported his cruel behavior towards her and his struggles with alcohol abuse. After his release in 2003, Yu embarked on a path of depravity and crime that would horrify the world and plunge the city into fear for years. During his time in prison, he became fascinated with Zhang Duyan, a murderer who killed 9 people between 1999 and 2000, primarily targeting wealthy individuals to commit theft driven by greed for accumulating wealth. Yu seemed to identify with Zhang, sharing a deep resentment toward the rich, whom he blamed for his own misfortunes. Simultaneously, Yu developed profound animosity towards women following his divorce. This resentment, combined with his admiration for Zhang, fueled his hatred and destructive thoughts. He later expressed beliefs that women should not be escorts and that wealthy people should be held accountable for their privilege. After moving into his mother's house following his release, these twisted ideologies drove him further down the path toward the horrific crimes that would eventually earn him the title of the Cloaked Killer. Yu was granted permission to see his son, though these visits could have taken a much darker turn. Yu had devised a plan to exact revenge on his ex-wife in the most brutal way possible, intending to kill both her and their son. However, he ultimately admitted that he couldn't bring himself to follow through with it, leaving his wife and child unharmed. Instead, he shifted his focus to a new target: wealthy individuals. But before pursuing this goal, Yu decided he needed to practice killing, and he already had a plan for how to do so. Yu crafted his own weapon by modifying a large hammer, shortening its handle for convenience. Armed with this weapon, along with a knife and gloves, he prepared for what he called his revenge. To test his weapon, Yu began luring stray dogs into isolated areas of the woods and brutally attacking them. It's worth noting that many serial killers exhibit similar behaviors in their early years. By September 2003, Yu was just an ordinary man who had recently been released from prison and was savoring his newfound freedom. However, this freedom was short-lived. Within 2 weeks, he began executing his sinister plan, targeting a wealthy neighborhood. His first victim was identified quickly. Professor Lee Deok-soo, a wealthy man in his 70s, lived with his wife, Lee Eun-ok, in one of the elegant houses in the neighborhood. At 10 a.m., Yu forcefully entered their home, armed with his homemade hammer. He first struck Deok-soo in the neck before shifting his focus to Eun-ok, brutally striking her with the hammer until he was certain she was dead. Finally, he brought Deok-soo's life to an end. After committing the crime, Yu calmly cleaned the rooms, scrubbed away the blood, and walked out. However, he soon realized he had left his knife behind and returned to retrieve it. This time, when he broke into the house more aggressively and caused damage, he deliberately staged the scene to resemble a botched robbery in an attempt to mislead investigators. This plan ultimately backfired. When the police inspected the crime scene, they discovered footprints that later proved to be a significant clue. On October 9th, in another upscale neighborhood of Seoul, Yu, carrying the same weapons, broke into a wealthy family's home around noon. Inside, he encountered an 85-year-old woman named Kang Eun-sun and fatally stabbed her with a knife. Her screams caused her daughter-in-law, Lee Suk-jin, to rush into the room. Yu angrily demands that Suk-jin bow her head in defeat, but she firmly refuses and even threatens him in front of her husband and sons. Enraged, Yu reacted violently and killed her swiftly. Eun-sun's disabled nephew, Go Jin-soo, became Yu's next victim. Yu forced him to kneel and brutally beat him with a hammer, killing him mercilessly. This case revealed just how severely Yu's psychopathy had escalated. Evidence from this crime scene and previous ones caught the attention of the police, providing them with a crucial lead. Investigators launched a search through their database to identify the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Yu continued his violent spree, seemingly emboldened by his actions. His next target was a 60-year-old woman named Yu Jun-hee, who lived alone. Yu broke into her house and, upon encountering her, dragged her into the bathroom, where he savagely beat her nearly to death. Her son later discovered her barely alive, but she succumbed to her injuries despite paramedics' best efforts, dying half an hour after being found. Media outlets began reporting on strange deaths in the area, noting their geographic proximity and raising questions about whether the crimes were connected. Evidence from various crime scenes indicated similarities between the killings, making the connection increasingly apparent. Public fear grew, yet police initially denied any links between the murders. It would be several weeks before Yu's dark urges drove him to kill again. On November 4, 2003, he broke into a home in a wealthy neighborhood located in Jeonnam-gu Province. Inside, he confronted the housekeeper with a knife, threatening her to comply with his demands. Under duress, she led him to the owner's bedroom, where the 87-year-old homeowner, Kim Jong-suk, and a 1-year-old child, presumably her grandson, were present. But this time, Yu encountered a situation he had never faced before. As Yu rushed at Jong-suk with a hammer, the housekeeper grabbed the baby and attempted to escape through the door. Instead of attacking the child, Yu took him from her, carried him to another room, and left him there unharmed. Returning to the bedroom, he discovered the homeowner was dead and redirected his violence toward the housekeeper, who tragically lost her life in the attack. However, this time, he made a critical mistake. To cover his tracks, he resorted to his usual method of smashing property to make the scene appear like a failed robbery. However, he realized he had left blood traces on the safe door after cutting his finger while attempting to open it, a crucial lead for the police. If Yu's decision to spare the baby initially seemed to hint at a shred of humanity, his chilling actions afterward destroyed any such impression, leaving a trail of horror and disgust. Yu attempted to destroy evidence by setting the house on fire with the child still inside, then watched the flames consume parts of the home from a safe distance. Despite the intense fire that destroyed the bodies and the main bedroom, most of the house remained intact. Investigators were able to recover surviving CCTV footage, which offered them a glimpse of South Korea's new serial killer. The footage showed a man wearing a sweater he had taken from the house, likely to cover the bloodstains on his clothes. Although only visible from behind, the image provided a valuable lead for investigators. Police also discovered another set of shoe prints at the crime scene, further linking this murder to previous ones. Still, Yu continued his spree. While following his established pattern, he decided to deviate and seek change, which led him to his next victim. Yu, now posing as a police officer by obtaining a uniform, began extorting money from women working in escort services or the red light district. He excelled at this illegal activity, earning enough money to rent an apartment and maintain his reckless lifestyle. During this time, Yu started dating a woman from the escort services. His disdain for women deepened when she refused his proposal to live together after discovering his troubled past, including his previous marriage. This rejection marked a turning point for Yu, sparking his desire for revenge. On March 16, 2004, Yu returned to the streets with sinister intentions. Dressed as a police officer, he pretended to arrest a girl and took her to his apartment. This time, unlike his previous victims, he killed her by strangulation, fully revealing his deeply sadistic nature. Due to the inability to safely move the body out of the third floor, Yu decided to put it in a grocery bag and bury it near Sogang University. To ensure he wouldn't reuse the burial site, he marked the spot with a bottle cap. His next victim deviated from his usual pattern. After buying fake Viagra from a street vendor on Jae-sun but it doesn't work, Yu once again disguises himself as a police officer and arrests Jae-sun for selling illegal pharmaceuticals. Driving Jae-sun's personal van, he went to a secluded area and launched a brutal attack. He wounded Jae-sun in the head and neck, but Jae-sun fought back, injuring him in the process. Infuriated by the resistance, Yu struck back with a hammer, landing over 20 brutal blows to Jae-sun's head. Yu's blood was discovered in Jae-sun's van, forcing him to eliminate the evidence. He drove the van to a nearby parking lot under cover of night and set it on fire, destroying both the vehicle and the body inside. Following this event, Yu focused on targeting women working in escort services within the red light district. This marked the beginning of a brief but horrifying series of murders, resulting in the deaths of many people and leaving deep scars on the families affected by his violent actions. Yu changed his approach by luring women to his apartment, where he assaulted them individually before burying their bodies in various locations. To avoid burying in the same place, he marked each place with a bottle cap. He repeated this method with 9 victims, however, his lack of foresight ultimately led to his downfall. Suspicion arose when a massage parlor owner began noticing a pattern of unexplained disappearances. Several of the missing women worked for establishments owned by the same man. Strangely enough, family or friends are often unaware of these disappearances because many of these girls live independently, which makes them more likely to become targets of attacks. One day, the massage shop owner received a request from a man who wanted to use the services of a girl working at the shop. Further investigation revealed that the phone number belonged to one of the earlier missing victims. Alarmed, the owner contacted the police and worked with them to craft a plan aimed at capturing the perpetrator, suspecting that the women were being abducted and possibly trafficked. When the investigators sent an undercover employee to collaborate on the plan, the police prepared to apprehend the suspect, seemingly close to detaining Yu. However, Yu abruptly canceled the meeting and called the girl back. The reason? The girl's height played a key role. Many of Yu's victims had been forced into submissive positions, often kneeling, which indicated his preference for control. His targets were typically elderly individuals, vulnerable women, or escort service workers, chosen because they were easier to overpower. Encountering a taller girl made Yu feel less dominant, which prompted him to call off the meeting at the last minute. The police didn't give up. Shortly afterward, they identified the perfect undercover officer, and Yu took the bait. Before he could act, he was surrounded by police officers. During his arrest, Yu was seen desperately chewing something, later discovered to be business cards belonging to several women. During interrogation, he provided shocking information far beyond the expectations of the police. Yu was transferred to the Seoul Police Department, where investigators questioned him thoroughly about his activities. Although he denied any involvement in abducting or trafficking women, Yu ultimately confessed to multiple murders in affluent neighborhoods. He claimed to have killed more than 20 people, beginning with the Gangnam-gu murders and concluding with the murder of an escort worker just days before his arrest. Despite his confession, the police were skeptical and hesitant to believe his claims immediately, suspecting him of exaggerating to shock them. Whether Yu had fully planned his next move is unclear, but he exploited his epilepsy to stage a fake seizure. Remarkably, the officers believed him, removed his handcuffs, and left the door open, assuming he was too weak to pose any threat. This lapse in judgment allowed him to escape to his apartment, where he began destroying evidence. Within 12 hours, the police located you again and detained him, this time ensuring there was no opportunity for him to flee. During interrogations, you repeatedly changed his story. He eventually agreed to guide the police to the burial sites of his victims. During these crime scene investigations, he earned the nickname the Cloaked Killer because the police had to photograph the remains while he was draped in a yellow cloak, his face concealed behind a mask. The police department faced significant criticism for its handling of the case. You might never have been caught if not for the intervention of local massage parlor owners. He had openly stated that he intended to continue his acts of revenge until someone stopped him. During the trial, you attempted to attack the judge and then attempted to end his life while in custody, causing unnecessary delays in the trial process. Upon returning to court, he attempted to assault a spectator and showed no remorse toward the families of his victims. Eventually, Yu Young-chul was found guilty and received the maximum sentence. He is now on death row. Although South Korea has not carried out the death penalty since 1997, his appalling crimes and utter disregard for human life have sparked outrage across the nation. Even if the death penalty is not enforced, the public finds solace in knowing that you will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to become pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan, possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son David faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer took care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had 2 distinct personalities. He described one of his 2 personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, they also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, she had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, this horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The 3 suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White, who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness.